The day I walked into that courtroom, my daughter Amanda rolled her eyes at her husband as if I were just an annoying old woman. But when the judge saw me, the world stopped. "Doña Blanca," he murmured, his eyes wide. "Are you for real?" The entire courtroom fell silent as my daughter and her arrogant husband exchanged panicked glances. But before continuing, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and leave a comment about where you're watching this video from. We love to hear the depths of our stories. My name is Blanca. I'm 70 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was just an ordinary grandmother. Every morning, I woke up at 5:30 a.m., made my coffee in an antique mug my late husband Alfredo had given me for our 30th anniversary, and watered my orchids while watching the sun rise through the kitchen window. It was a simple and predictable life, but full of small joys that kept me connected to the memories of the past. For almost 50 years, I was the mother who sacrificed everything for my only child, Amanda. I worked as a cleaner during the day, a seamstress at night, and on weekends, I sold homemade snacks at the local market. All so Amanda could study at good schools and have the life I never had. When she married Ricardo, a man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached his, I swallowed my discomfort and welcomed them for Sunday lunch with my best dishes and a smile that hid my worries. After my husband's death, I hoped Amanda and I would grow closer. How wrong I was. Instead of finding solace in each other, she began to see me as a burden. Her visits became mechanical, her calls more rare. The way she viewed the house where I raised her, the house where she took her first steps, where we celebrated all her achievements, changed completely. It was no longer a home of memories, but an asset to be acquired. The biggest disappointment of my life happened on a rainy Tuesday in October. I had prepared cod with potatoes, the recipe Amanda loved as a child. I laid out the embroidered tablecloth I made when she entered college, and even bought a fresh flower arrangement for the occasion. When they arrived, Ricardo entered without knocking, as if he already owned the house. She threw herself into the armchair that had belonged to my Alfredo and turned on the television without even acknowledging me. Amanda was carrying a folder of documents and had that distant look she'd developed over the past few years, a look that belonged to a stranger, not the little girl who had once held my hand so confidently. "Mom, we need to talk," she said in a cold voice that chilled me to the bone. She sat on the edge of the sofa as if she didn't want to stay there for long. "Ricardo and I decided this house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone anymore." I felt my heart clench as she continued. "We found a great residential home for people her age. She'll have companionship activities, medical assistance. But Amanda, this is our home," I replied, my voice failing. "Here is everything we built, all our memories." Ricardo interrupted without taking his eyes off the television. "Memories are in your head, Doña Blanca, not on the walls. You'll like the residential complex. It's modern, it has a garden." What he didn't say, but what his calculating eyes revealed, was that they wanted my house. The house that Alfredo and I had built with so much sacrifice over decades. The house where we kept not only memories, but also a part of our souls. Amanda placed the folder on the table. "We've already taken care of all the paperwork. You just have to sign it." His voice was mechanical, as if he were talking about a common contract, not about uprooting his own mother from the only place I had left in the world. When I refused to sign, the mood quickly changed. Ricardo turned off the television and faced me with a coldness he had never displayed so openly. "Mrs. Blanca," he said, straightening his expensive tie, "you need to be reasonable. You can't continue living alone. Last week you forgot the stove on. It's dangerous." That was a blatant lie. I'd never forgotten the stove was on in my entire life. But I realized at that moment that they were willing to invent anything to get what they wanted. In the days that followed, they intensified the pressure. They brought in real estate agents without telling me, strangers who measured my rooms and talked about remodeling potential, as if I weren't even there. Amanda started packing my things without permission, deciding on her own what I needed to take and what could be discarded or sold. "This dress is so old, Mom," she said, holding up the blue dress I wore to my husband's funeral. "He won't need it in the nursing home." Every object she discarded was like a piece of my history being ripped away. Old photographs, love letters Alfredo had written to me, the books we read together on winter nights. All of this to Amanda and Ricardo was just a nuisance taking up space in the house they already considered theirs. The final straw was when Amanda found my jewelry box. It was a small, carved wooden box that Alfredo had given me on our first wedding anniversary. Inside, along with a few sentimental pieces, was the pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. "I'm going to save this for you," she said, putting the box in her bag. "These things can disappear in the residential development." At that moment, I saw something in my daughter's eyes I'd never noticed before. Greed, pure and simple greed disguised as filial concern. And for the first time in my life, I felt a rage I didn't know I was capable of. That night, alone in my room, listening to Amanda and Ricardo conversing quietly in the living room about how to solve the problem I had become, I cried like I hadn't cried since my husband's death. But they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of indignation, of revolt against the injustice of being treated like a disposable object after a lifetime of dedication. That's when I made a decision. I wouldn't go down without a fight. I wouldn't allow them to erase my existence, to reduce me to an inconvenience to be solved. With that newfound determination, I wiped my tears and began to think about how I could defend myself from those who were supposed to protect me. What I didn't know was that before long, I would discover a secret that would completely shift the balance of power in that house. A secret my dear Alfredo had kept to protect me from just such a moment. The next morning, Amanda arrived early with more boxes and renewed determination. "Today, we're going to organize Dad's office," she announced, heading into the room I'd kept untouched since Alfredo left 3 years ago. "No," I replied with a firmness that surprised her. "That place isn't ready to be touched yet." "Mom, it's been 3 years," she replied impatiently. "We can't maintain a sanctuary forever. The house needs to be prepared for sale." I realized at that moment that it didn't matter what I said. They had already decided my future. The house would be sold with or without my consent. They would find a way to declare me incapable if I didn't cooperate. When Amanda left to get more boxes from the car, I went into the office and locked the door. This was the last refuge of my husband's memories, the place where his scent still floated in the air, where his things remained exactly as he had left them. I ran my fingers over the books on the shelf, the papers meticulously organized in folders, the picture frame with our wedding photo. It was then that I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. On the top shelf of the bookcase, hidden behind a row of antique encyclopedias, was a small safe built into the wall. In 47 years of marriage, I'd never known it existed. My hands shook as I tried to figure out the combination. I tried our wedding date, Alfredo's birthday, Amanda's birth. Nothing worked. Finally, on an impulse, I tried the date we met that rainy Sunday afternoon when we were sheltering under the same awning of a bakery. To my surprise, the safe opened. Inside was a leather folder with Alfredo's initials engraved in gold. When I opened it, I found documents that took my breath away. Property deeds, bank statements for accounts I hadn't heard of before, stock certificates in renowned companies, insurance policies with values that made my head spin. And in the middle of it all, a sealed envelope with my name written in my husband's unmistakable handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and began to read. My dear Blanca, if you're reading this letter, it means I've already left, and you found what I saved to protect your future. Forgive me for keeping our true financial resources a secret all these years. It wasn't out of a lack of trust, but out of caution. I've always been suspicious of Ricardo's intentions. There's something about him that worried me from the start. An unbridled ambition that made me fear what might happen when I was no longer here to protect you. That's why I quietly set up this safety net, investing every extra cent we managed to save. Everything documented in this folder belongs exclusively to you. Amanda will only be entitled to a small portion if, and only if, she cares for you with the same love and dedication you always had for her. Otherwise, you have all the power to protect yourself. Use this power wisely, my love. Not out of revenge, but to ensure the respect you deserve. Deep down, Amanda is a good person, just easily influenced. But if you need to defend yourself, you now have the means to do so. With all my love forever, Alfredo. Tears streamed down my face as I absorbed every word. My Alfredo, always so quiet and discreet, had quietly built an empire to protect me. While I thought we were living modestly, he was investing in properties, stocks, and businesses that were now worth a fortune. Among the documents, I found something that left me speechless. The deed to the building where Amanda and Ricardo lived. The luxurious apartment they were so proud of, which they flaunted as a symbol of their success, actually belonged to me. They paid rent to a property manager who deposited the money directly into an account, in my name, an account I didn't even know existed. There was more. Alfredo owned shares in the company where Ricardo worked. These weren't minor shares, but a significant stake enough to influence important decisions, even about the future of employees like my son-in-law. Sitting on the office floor, surrounded by papers representing more money than I ever imagined owning, I laughed through my tears. Amanda and Ricardo believed they were kicking me out of my house to keep it for themselves, unaware that this house was the smallest of my properties. The insistent knocking on the door brought me back to reality. "Mom, open that door right now!" Amanda shouted. I quickly stuffed the most important documents into my bag and returned the rest to the safe, carefully locking it. When I opened the door, Amanda looked at me irritably. "What are you doing locked in here? I was just saying goodbye." I replied with a calmness that disconcerted her. "You're right, Amanda. Maybe it's time to move on." She studied me suspiciously, but then her face softened, believing I had finally given in. "I'm glad you understand, Mom. You'll see, it's the best thing for everyone." Yes, I agreed, holding tightly to my bag where I kept the documents that would change everything. I'm sure everyone will get exactly what they deserve. That night, while Amanda and Ricardo celebrated their apparent victory with a bottle of expensive wine in the living room, I called a number I found in Alfredo's contacts. Dr. Elena Viana, a lawyer. Dr. Elena, my name is Blanca Mendoza, Alfredo Mendoza's widow. I need your help with some urgent matters related to my inheritance. When I hung up the phone, I looked at the photograph of Alfredo on the nightstand and smiled. "You always knew, didn't you, old man? You always knew this day would come." For the first time in months, I slept soundly, not with the resignation of someone who's been defeated, but with the tranquility of someone who's finally found their strength. We embraced it. Elena Viana was exactly as Alfredo described her in his notes, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes that missed no detail. When I walked into her office 3 days later, she had already analyzed copies of the documents I emailed her and put together a preliminary strategy. Doña Blanca said, after offering me a coffee, "Your husband was extremely meticulous. All the documents are in order. The investments were made legally, and the will is absolutely uncontested. You are without a doubt a very wealthy woman." Those words sounded strange to me, as I'd always been counting pennies to make ends meet. But the lawyer continued showing me a detailed account of all my assets. The most interesting thing she noted is that her husband structured everything so that his daughter and son-in-law couldn't challenge it. The behavior clause in the will is particularly clever. They would only be entitled to a portion of the assets if they cared for you with love and respect. Considering what you told me about their attempts to remove you from your own home, we can easily argue that this clause was violated. What should I do now? I asked, still trying to absorb the magnitude of the situation. Elena leaned forward with a determined gleam in her eyes. First, don't sign anything they put in front of you. Second, I need you to maintain the appearance that you haven't discovered anything yet. The more they expose themselves, the better for our case. And as for the house, let them think they've won for now. Pretend you're considering moving to the development. Ask to tour the place. Ask about costs. The more they reveal, the more ammunition we'll have. In the following weeks, I followed Elena's instructions to the letter. I allowed Amanda and Ricardo to continue with their plans, feigning resignation, while secretly documenting every conversation, every veiled threat, every attempt to belittle me or make me seem incapable. Ricardo even brought a doctor friend to evaluate my mental condition, a man who barely examined me before suggesting I might be developing dementia. I recorded the entire fraudulent consultation on my cell phone following Elena's instructions. Amanda, for her part, intensified her efforts to empty the house. Boxes and boxes of my memories were packed, labeled, and sent for donation or simply discarded. It hurt to see my memories being treated with such disdain, but I stood firm, knowing that each act only strengthened my case. One afternoon, while Amanda was cataloging my belongings in the living room, I blurted out a piece of information like I didn't want anything. You know, Amanda, I was thinking about giving you my pearl necklace before we went to the residential home. It was your grandmother's after all. She stopped what she was doing, visibly interested. The pearl necklace? The one you kept in the little wooden box? Yes, but I can't find it. Did you see it somewhere? Amanda blushed slightly. No, I don't know what you're talking about. It's strange, I continued innocently. I also can't find the sapphire earrings your dad gave me for our 40th anniversary. I hope they didn't get lost in the move. I saw the discomfort in her eyes, the momentary guilt that was soon replaced by a poorly crafted excuse about having put my jewelry in a safe place. Later, I reported that conversation to Elena, who smiled with satisfaction. Perfect! We're building a solid case for asset abuse. The decisive moment came when, following Elena's advice, I asked to visit the residential home before making my final decision. Amanda and Ricardo took me one Sunday, showing me a place that looked more like a nursing home than the paradise they'd promised. Tiny rooms, overworked staff, and a smell of disinfectant that barely masked the urine in the air. Isn't that wonderful, Mom? Amanda asked with forced enthusiasm. Look, it even has a communal TV room. I looked around the dreary living room where half a dozen elderly people were staring at an antique television and felt my stomach turn. How much does this place cost? I asked. Ricardo answered promptly. Don't worry about that. We'll sell your house and the money will be more than enough to cover the costs for many years. What if I outlive the money? The silence that followed was answer enough. They hadn't thought about it, or worse, they'd thought about it and didn't care. Back home, I remained silent as they animatedly discussed their plans to remodel the house as soon as I left. They talked about knocking down walls, modernizing the kitchen, transforming my bedroom into a home office for Ricardo. And Dad's room? I asked suddenly. Amanda hesitated. Well, we were thinking of converting it into a guest room, or maybe a bigger closet. I understand, I replied, looking out the car window to hide the pain in my eyes. That night, I called Elena and told her. I'm ready. We went ahead with the plan. 2 days later, Amanda and Ricardo showed up with the final paperwork for the transfer of the house and my admission to the residential development. A man in a suit accompanied them. Their lawyer, whom I later discovered, was just a friend of Ricardo's who worked as a real estate consultant. "Mom, we brought you the papers for you to sign," Amanda announced, scattering papers across the kitchen table. "As soon as you sign here and here, we can finalize your move into the development. We've already reserved a spot for next week." I looked at the papers, calmly pretending to study them as I listened to the bell ring. "Who could it be?" Ricardo asked, irritated by the interruption. "It must be my friend Margarita," I replied innocently. "I asked her to come help me with some things." When Ricardo opened the door, it wasn't Margarita who walked in, but Elena Viana, accompanied by a bailiff and a social worker. "Good afternoon," she said with a professional smile. "I'm Dr. Elena Viana, attorney for Mrs. Blanca Mendoza. We're here for an official visit related to a report of attempted fraud and abuse against an elderly person." Amanda's face drained of color as Ricardo tried to maintain his composure. "There must be some mistake," he said, extending a hand that Elena completely ignored. "We're just helping my mother-in-law move to a place more appropriate for her age." "Interesting," Elena replied, pointing at the papers on the table. "So I can assume these documents were reviewed by an independent attorney representing Ms. Blanca's interests?" The silence was deafening. "I'd also like to report," Elena continued, "that we have reason to believe that jewelry and valuables belonging to Ms. Blanca were removed from this residence without her authorization. The bailiff has a warrant to inspect those items." It was then that I saw something I'll never forget. The exact moment my daughter realized her plan was falling apart. Her eyes widened in panic, then narrowed in rage, and finally filled with tears as realization dawned on her. "Mom," she whispered, "what did you do?" I stood up slowly, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "What did I do, Amanda?" "I stood up for myself, just as your dad knew I would need to one day." The bailiff and the caseworker began documenting the condition of the house, photographing the stacked boxes, the partially emptied rooms, the unsigned transfer papers on the table. Elena stood by my side, a calm, authoritative presence that exuded confidence. "Mrs. Blanca," the social worker said, "do you feel coerced into leaving your residence against your will?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "My daughter and son-in-law have pressured me for months, even threatening to declare me mentally incompetent if I didn't agree to go to a nursing home." Amanda spoke up indignant. "This is absurd. We're just trying to take care of her. She's confused. She's forgotten things she left the stove on." "Interesting," Elena interrupted, removing a small device from her pocket. "I have recordings here from the last 2 months that contradict that statement, including a conversation where Mr. Ricardo admits to having fabricated the stove incident to convince Mrs. Amanda that her mother could no longer live alone." Ricardo paled. "That's illegal. You can't record people without consent?" Elena actually smiled. "Ms. Blanca recorded conversations in her own home where she has every right to protect her interests. Furthermore, we have recent medical reports attesting to her full mental capacity prepared by independent professionals, not by medical friends brought in by the gentleman." The social worker made notes on his chart, while the bailiff continued his methodical work. Amanda collapsed into a chair, crying openly now. "Mom, why is he doing this to us? We're his family." "Family," I repeated, feeling a mixture of sadness and indignation. Was it as family that you packed up my memories like trash? Was it as family that you took your grandmother's jewelry without permission? Was it as family that you and Ricardo plotted to abandon me in a fifth-rate nursing home to take my house? It wasn't like that, she sobbed. Ricardo convinced me it was the best thing for you. He said you were losing your memory, that it was dangerous for you to live alone. And you believed him instead of trusting your own mother. I asked, feeling my heart break again. Do you know me like that too? Ricardo, realizing the situation was out of control, tried to regain his authority. This is a misunderstanding we can resolve as a family. We don't need lawyers or bailiffs. Doña Blanca, we always wanted the best for you. The best, Elena chimed in. Like the attempts to transfer ownership of the house to Mrs. Amanda's name, even before Mrs. Blanca moved into the development, or the unauthorized withdrawals from Mrs. Blanca's bank account in recent months. Amanda's eyes widened. I don't know what you're talking about, Mom. I swear I didn't take his money. No, you didn't, I replied calmly. But Ricardo did. I have bank statements showing transfers made from my card to a joint account of yours on dates when I wasn't even home. Ricardo adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, I continued, feeling a strange calm wash over me. Just as it's no mistake that you thought I was a poor, helpless old woman, easy to manipulate and discard. But there's something you don't know. I walked slowly to my bag and removed a folder of documents Elena had prepared for me. Your father, Amanda, wasn't just the discreet accountant you knew. He quietly built a financial empire over the years and left it all to you. I laid out property deeds, stock certificates, and bank statements with securities on the table, all of which made Ricardo's eyes widen in disbelief and greed. This building on Paulista Avenue, I pointed to one of the deeds. It's mine, as is the land on the coast you visited last summer, believing it belonged to your boss, Ricardo. Amanda took the papers with trembling hands. It can't be true. It is, Elena confirmed. And there's more. The apartment you live in also belongs to Mrs. Blanca. You pay rent to a property manager who deposits the rent directly into an account in her name. Ricardo staggered as if he'd been punched. This is impossible. And those shares in the company where you work, Ricardo, the ones that were bought by an anonymous investor 5 years ago and guaranteed your promotion, they're mine too. The silence that followed was absolute. Ricardo seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Amanda looked at me as if she were seeing a ghost. Why didn't Dad ever tell us? She finally asked, her voice almost inaudible. Because he didn't trust Ricardo's intentions, and apparently he was right to be cautious. Ricardo tried one last desperate maneuver. Mrs. Blanca, we can resolve this. There was obviously a misunderstanding. We weren't aware of these resources. We were just concerned for your safety. If you have the means, we can find a better, more luxurious place. I'm not interested in any better place, I replied firmly. This is my home, and I'm going to stay here. And what about our apartment? Are you going to evict us? That depends, I replied, feeling a mixture of pain and determination. How much are you willing to learn about respect, dignity, and true love? Elena then spoke. In the meantime, I have a temporary injunction here, preventing any of you from removing any more items from this house or attempting to transfer ownership. We also request the immediate return of all property already removed, especially family jewels and personal documents. Amanda collapsed into sobs while Ricardo remained paralyzed, as if trying to process all the information he had just received. The bailiff continued his work methodically, photographing every room, every document, every piece of evidence of what had happened in that house. I suggest, Elena said in a firm voice, that you two go outside now and think carefully about your next steps. We are prepared to pursue this case with all its legal consequences unless we reach an agreement that fully respects Ms. Blanca's rights and wishes. Ricardo finally found his voice, but he was no longer the arrogant man I knew. There was fear in his eyes. How much is all this worth? He asked, gesturing toward the documents. Elena smiled coldly. Much more than you could ever pay in a lifetime of work, Mr. Ricardo. Now, I suggest you leave. As the door closed behind them, I felt my legs give way. Elena guided me to the couch, where I collapsed emotionally exhausted. You were very brave, he said, sitting next to me. Not everyone would have the strength to face their own family in that way. I don't know if it was courage or desperation, I confessed, watching the social worker still taking notes. I never wanted to get to this point. Unfortunately, it's often the ones we love the most who hurt us the most, Elena replied. But now you're in control. What do you want to do next? I looked around the room at the walls that had witnessed so many moments of my life, at the empty spaces where photographs and mementos had once been. I want my things back, I replied firmly. And then, I want Amanda to understand exactly what she did, not out of revenge, but because she needs to learn. In the days that followed, I received frantic calls from Amanda. At first, I ignored them all, following Elena's advice to keep my distance until the legal issues were resolved. Ricardo, on the other hand, disappeared completely. I learned later that he had taken a leave of absence from work and traveled to resolve personal matters. A week after the confrontation, Elena brought me news. We received a settlement proposal, she said, handing me a folder. Your son-in-law is willing to return all your possessions publicly, acknowledge that you are of sound mind, and renounce any claim to your house or assets. And what does he want in return, I asked, knowing Ricardo's character too well to believe in genuine repentance. That you not use your influence as a shareholder to harm him in the company, and that you not evict him from the apartment immediately. He's asking for 6 months to find another place. I considered the proposal for a moment. And Amanda? What does she say about this? Elena hesitated. His daughter wasn't involved in this negotiation. From what I understand, there are tensions in the marriage after the revelation. That didn't surprise me. Ricardo had always been the kind of man who abandoned ship when it started sinking. Now that he knew he wouldn't get my fortune, he was probably already blaming Amanda for the plan's failure. Tell Ricardo I accept his terms with one caveat, I answered after a moment's thought. If he wants to stay in the apartment for 6 months, he'll have to raise the rent by 50%. After all, now he knows who the real owner is. Elena smiled. It would be a pleasure to pass on your message. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor. Amanda stood at my door alone with dark circles under her eyes and a face marked by sleepless nights. Can I come in? She asked timidly, so different from the arrogant woman who had tried to kick me out of my own house. I quietly opened the door and let her in. She was carrying 2 large boxes, which she carefully placed on the living room table. Her jewelry, she said in a heavy voice. All of them, and also her photo albums, Dad's letters, everything I took. I opened the first box, and there they were, untouched, the treasures of my life. My mother's pearl necklace, the earrings Alfredo had given me, the engagement ring with the small sapphire he'd saved for a year to buy. Ricardo and I broke up, Amanda said, abruptly breaking the silence. He blamed me for everything. He said I should have realized Dad would never live so modestly if he didn't have something hidden. I didn't respond, just continued checking the contents of the boxes, making sure everything was there. Mom, he continued, his voice trembling. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. What we did, what I allowed to happen, is unforgivable. But I need you to know that I truly believed I was doing the right thing. I finally raised my eyes to hers. And the right thing to do was to kick me out of my house, discard my memories like trash, treat me like a senile child. No, she admitted, tears streaming freely. Ricardo convinced me that you were getting worse, that it was dangerous for you to live alone. He made up stories about you forgetting things, leaving the stove on, and I I believed him instead of trusting my own mother. "Why, Amanda?" I asked, feeling the weight of decades of seemingly wasted love. "After everything I did for you, after all the sacrifices, how could you believe I deserved to be treated that way?" She sat down on the couch, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "Because it was easier," she finally confessed. "It was easier to believe you needed help than to admit that I had married a man who only cared about money and status. It was easier to pretend we were looking out for you than to face the truth about what we had become." Her face contorted with genuine shame. "When Ricardo first suggested we sell the house, I said no. Then he began to plant doubts in my head, little seeds of concern about her mental health, her ability to live on her own. And I let those seeds grow because deep down, I wanted the house. I wanted to transform her, modernize her, erase the marks of the past that made me feel guilty for not being the daughter I should be." Her words hit me like a revelation. It wasn't just greed. It was guilt. It was the desire to erase the evidence of everything I had done for her, everything she failed to repay. And now I asked, "What do you want from me, Amanda?" She wiped her tears with the back of her hand like she did when she was a child. "Nothing. I don't deserve anything from you. I just came to give you back what's yours and to say that even if you never forgive me, I know what I did, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person." I looked at my daughter, because despite everything, she was still my daughter. And I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Honesty. Not the calculated manipulation Ricardo had perfected, nor the false concern she'd displayed in recent months, but genuine vulnerability. "Where are you living?" I asked. "With a friend for now. I'm looking for a small apartment I can afford on my salary." I nodded, absorbing the information. "And the apartment Ricardo's there," she replied. "He kept almost everything in the separation agreement. He said it was the least I could do after ruining our plans." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Ricardo remained Ricardo until the very end. "Amanda," I finally said, "I can't promise things will ever be the same again. You broke something deep between us, and it's going to take time if it ever happens to rebuild that trust." She nodded, accepting my words without protest. "But," I continued, "your dad believed that deep down, you were still the little girl he raised. He believed you could find your way back to the person you were meant to be. Dad was always better at seeing the good in people than I was." She murmured. "Yes, I agreed, and maybe I need to learn to have a little more of that faith." I didn't forgive her that day. I didn't invite her back home, or promise to forget what had happened. But when she stood up to leave, I didn't stop her from briefly embracing me, a shy, uncertain touch that held as much regret as hope. After she left, I was left alone with my recovered jewelry and the pain of a betrayal that was still very fresh. But for the first time in months, I also felt something different. Not only the satisfaction of having defended myself, but also the possibility, however remote, of recovery. 2 weeks after Amanda's visit, I received an unexpected call from Elena. "Doña Blanca, a situation has arisen that you should be aware of. Ricardo didn't pay the increased rent as per our agreement, and from what I understand, he's planning to leave the country." "Leave the country?" "Where to? Apparently, he has a cousin in Spain. My sources at his company indicate he's resigned and is already selling his belongings." That didn't surprise me. Ricardo was always the type to run away when things got tough. What surprised me was what Elena said next. "There's something else. Amanda reached out to me yesterday asking for legal help. She discovered that Ricardo emptied their joint accounts before the separation and left her with various debts in his name. I felt a pang in my chest. Despite everything, it was my daughter who was suffering. What does she intend to do? We're entering with precautionary measures to prevent him from leaving the country without resolving his pending issues. But honestly, I think he's already wired the money abroad. Amanda is practically bankrupt and in debt. After hanging up, I stared out the window for a long time, looking at the garden where Amanda used to play as a child. I remembered Alfredo's letter, his words about using power not to hurt, but to protect and teach. The next day, I asked Elena to prepare some documents and called Amanda. "We need to talk," I said simply. She arrived punctually dressed in simple clothes I'd never seen her wear before. The glamour of an executive's wife had completely disappeared. Elena told me about Ricardo. I started as soon as we sat down. About debts, money, everything. Amanda nodded resignedly. "He planned all of this months ago. While we were pretending to care about you, he was already preparing his escape. I was so stupid, Mom's so blind." "Many intelligent women are fooled by men like Ricardo," I replied. "Don't blame yourself for that. Blame yourself for what you did to me, not what he did to you." She lowered her eyes, accepting the harsh truth in my words. "I have a proposition for you." I continued sliding a folder across the table. "It's not charity or automatic forgiveness. It's an opportunity." Amanda opened the folder hesitantly, her eyes widening as she read the contents. "Is this an employment contract?" "Yes, for the Alfredo Mendoza Foundation. An organization I'm creating to help elderly victims of domestic abuse and abandonment." The idea had been born during sleepless nights when I realized my story wasn't unique. How many other elderly people were being manipulated by greedy relatives? How many were being forced to leave their homes to give up their lives without being as fortunate as I was to have a caring husband? "You want me to work for you?" Amanda asked, confused. "I want you to work for the foundation. Your management knowledge will be useful. The salary is modest but fair. And there's a housing clause. You can take the small apartment at the back of this house, which will save you rent while you get your life together." "Why?" he asked. "Why would he do this for me after all?" I stood up and walked to the window, watching my garden bloom in the afternoon sun. "I'm not doing this for you, Amanda. I'm doing it for the woman you can become. For the daughter your father believed you were deep down. And I'm doing it for all the elderly who weren't as lucky as I was, who don't have the means to defend themselves." I turned around to face her. "Your work will be arduous and often painful. You will hear stories that will remind you of what you yourself tried to do to me. You will have to look into the eyes of people who were betrayed by those who were meant to love them. And perhaps through that work, you'll truly understand what you were trying to do." Amanda held the contract with trembling hands. "I don't know if I deserve this opportunity." "You probably don't deserve it," I answered honestly. "But your dad always said forgiveness isn't something you deserve, it's something you offer. I'm not ready to forgive you completely, but I'm willing to offer a path." In the months that followed, I transformed my grief into purpose. With Elena's help, I created the Alfredo Mendoza Foundation, using part of the fortune my husband had accumulated to defend those unable to defend themselves. We bought a large house near mine and transformed it into a legal and emotional support center for vulnerable seniors. Amanda, true to her word, worked tirelessly. At first, the other foundation employees treated her with distrust. They all knew our story, which I never tried to hide. But over time, her genuine dedication began to gain respect. The path to redemption wasn't easy for her. There were days when she came home. The small apartment at the back of my house had become her home, with her eyes red from crying after hearing particularly painful stories of abandoned or exploited elderly people. How can you look at me every day knowing what I tried to do? He asked me one night when we met in the shared kitchen. Because I can see you're trying to change, I replied simply. And because your dad believed you could be better. Ricardo never returned. We learned through Foundation contacts that he had settled in Spain and was already involved with another woman, a wealthy widow, by coincidence or pattern. Part of me wondered if I should warn her, but another part knew that some predators are only stopped when they find prey that bites back. A year after the Foundation's creation, I received an honor I never expected: a Human Rights Award for our work with vulnerable elderly people. On the day of the ceremony, as I was preparing to give my speech, I looked at the audience and saw Amanda in the front row, applauding with tears in her eyes. That evening, after the ceremony, as we walked through my front yard, our front yard, as I was beginning to think, Amanda handed me a small package. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it," she replied nervously. Inside was a handmade artisanal book. Within the pages, Amanda had glued old photographs of our family, many of the same photos she had so carelessly packed away a year earlier. But now, each one was accompanied by a handwritten letter, recalling the moment captured and reflecting on the meaning of those memories. "I spent months searching for these photos," she explained. "Some were with Ricardo, others with friends I'd given them to without a thought. I wanted to gather our memories together again, not to erase them, but to honor them." I flipped through the book, carefully feeling the weight of decades of family history in my hands. On the last page was a recent photo of the Foundation with the entire team gathered in front of the building, and below it, a simple inscription. "To my mom, who taught me it's never too late to start over. And to my dad, who always knew I'd find my way back." That night, for the first time in over a year, I hugged my daughter wholeheartedly. It wasn't a complete forgiveness. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that we were both changing, growing, learning to be a family again, this time, based on mutual respect rather than obligation. As we stargazed from our shared garden, I thought about Alfredo and how he'd planned all of this, not just the financial protection, but also the possibility of redemption. He knew our daughter better than any of us. He knew she could be lost, but he also believed she could find her way back to the light. And as the stars shone above us, I felt he was right above all. 18 months after the Foundation's creation, I received news that would change everything again. One of the volunteer lawyers working with us looked me up with a grave expression. "Doña Blanca, we found something you should see," he said, handing me a folder. During our investigation into Mrs. Olivia's case, we discovered the same scheme was used against several other elderly women. And guess who's behind it all? I opened the folder and felt my blood run cold. There was Ricardo using another name, but unmistakable, in the surveillance photographs. He had secretly returned to Brazil and was operating a sophisticated scheme to deceive elderly widows, getting them to sign documents transferring their properties to shell companies. "He's back," I murmured, "and he's doing the same thing to other women." The lawyer nodded grimly. "We've already informed the authorities, but we need someone who knows him to make a formal identification, someone who can testify about his methods and personality." That evening, I spoke with Amanda about the discovery. She paled at the sight of the photographs and documents. "He didn't change anything," she said bitterly. "He just found new victims." "The authorities want us to testify against him," I explained. "I've already decided I'm going, but you don't need to get involved if you don't want to." Amanda looked at me with a determination that reminded me of myself. "No, Mom, I need to do this. I need to face him, not just for us, but for all those women." In the following weeks, we worked with the police and the prosecutor's office, providing detailed testimony about Ricardo's methods, the subtle manipulations, the small lies that gradually escalated into complete fraud. Amanda, in particular, was crucial in explaining how he had convinced her to participate in the plot against me, how he planted doubts and insecurities, how he gradually isolated his victims. When the day of the trial finally arrived, I felt an anxiety I hadn't experienced since the confrontation at my home. The courtroom was packed. Our case had received media attention in part due to the work of the Foundation, which was now nationally known for its fight against elder financial abuse. As I walked into the courtroom with Amanda at my side, I felt all eyes turn toward us. Ricardo's most recent victims were seated together, women ranging in age from 65 to 85, all with stories painfully similar to mine. Ricardo was brought in handcuffed, wearing a hand-me-down suit that contrasted with the elegance he had always displayed. When his eyes met mine, I saw a flash of anger quickly replaced by that mask of calculated charm he also wore. The decisive moment came when the judge entered the courtroom. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized him. "Judge Enrique Mendez," the bailiff announced. It was the young lawyer who had worked as a clerk at the court decades ago when I was a clerk there. The same shy man I was who had encouraged me when everyone else treated him with disdain. The boy I used to bring coffee to on the nights he worked late studying for exams. He didn't recognize me immediately busy with the initial procedures. But when it was my turn to testify and I announced my name, I saw his eyes rise from the papers with an expression of surprise and recognition. "Doña Blanca," he asked, adjusting his glasses as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Blanca Almeida, from the Regional Court Clerk's office." "Yes, Your Honor," I responded with a small smile. "It's been a long time." The judge smiled briefly before resuming his professional expression. "It certainly happened. Please continue with your testimony." For the next 2 hours, I recounted in detail everything Ricardo had done, how he had manipulated my daughter, how he had tried to strip me of my home and dignity, how he had planned to abandon me in a shady nursing home. I talked about discovering the fortune my husband had left behind and how that had thwarted his plans. And now, I concluded he's doing the same to other women who weren't as fortunate as I was to have a cautious husband. When I finished, Ricardo's lawyer stood up for cross-examination, trying to paint me as a confused woman who had imagined persecution where there was only family concern. "Mrs. Blanca," she asked with false sympathy, "isn't it true that you were having memory lapses at the time? That you sometimes forgot where you put things? Did you leave the stove on?" "No," I replied firmly. "I never had such problems. Your client fabricated those stories to convince my daughter that I needed to be hospitalized." "And how can you be so certain of that if I had memory problems?" she persisted with a condescending smile. "Objection, Your Honor," the prosecutor intervened. "Argumentative." "Accepted," Judge Enrique replied. "Counsel, please rephrase your question." But before she could do so, I asked permission to answer. The lady asks how I can be certain. I can be certain because I have complete medical reports prepared after my son-in-law's attempt to declare me incompetent. I can be certain because I have recordings of him admitting that he fabricated those incidents. And I can be certain because at 70 years old, I can still remember the first day Judge Enrique Mendez entered the courtroom as a clerk, wearing a navy blue suit that was too big around the shoulders, carrying a synthetic leather folder he had won from his mother as a graduation gift. The entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Enrique looked at me with a mixture of surprise and excitement. I remember every detail of that day, just as I remember every detail of the day my son-in-law and my daughter tried to convince me that I was no longer capable of taking care of myself. My memory, Madam Counselor, is perfectly intact. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the judge's pen scratching something in his notebook. Amanda immediately testified with a courage that filled me with pride. She spoke openly about how she had been manipulated, about her own guilt and regret, and about the path to redemption she had found through her work at the foundation. Ricardo convinced me that my mother was losing her mental capacity. She explained, her voice heavy with emotion. He started with small suggestions. Did you notice how your mom forgot that actor's name? Did you see how she mixed up the dates? Until I started seeing problems where none existed. When Ricardo finally testified, it was like watching an actor on stage. He denied all the accusations. He portrayed himself as a concerned son-in-law who only wanted the best for his mother-in-law. He even shed fake tears when talking about how hurt he was by the accusations. But then the prosecutor presented evidence recordings, falsified documents, testimony from all the other victims whose stories were almost identical to mine, and finally bank records showing how he had siphoned money from all of them. At the end of the 3-day trial, Judge Enrique Mendez handed down his sentence. Ricardo Alves da Costa. This court finds him guilty of all charges of fraud, ideological falsehood, coercion, and abuse against vulnerable elderly people. He exploited the trust of family members and women who in their golden years deserved protection and respect, not manipulation and theft. The judge adjusted his glasses, looking directly at Ricardo. Particularly disturbing to this court is the cold-bloodedness with which the Lord planned and executed his crimes, specifically targeting people he considered weak and incapable of defending themselves. He paused, then continued in a voice that combined authority and restrained emotion. For these crimes, I sentenced this gentleman to 12 years of closed confinement, in addition to full restitution to the victims and a fine proportional to the damage caused. As Ricardo was led out of the courtroom, Judge Enrique looked at me and made a small gesture of recognition that few noticed, but that meant the world to me. A reminder that small kindnesses, like encouraging an insecure young intern decades ago, can come back to haunt you when you least expect it. As we left the courtroom, we were surrounded by reporters and other elderly women who had attended the trial to seek inspiration and hope. A woman in her late 80s approached me with tears in her eyes. "You gave me courage," she said, taking my hands. After seeing her in the newspaper talking about the foundation, I realized my nephew was doing the same thing to me. Thanks to you, I managed to stop before it was too late. That evening at home, Amanda and I sat in the garden with a bottle of wine, celebrating not only the victory in court, but also the journey we had taken together. "Do you know what's the most ironic thing?" she said, looking up at the stars. If Ricardo had never tried to take over his house, the foundation would never have existed. All those women we're helping now would have nowhere to go. "Your dad always said that even in the worst situations we can find purpose," I replied. I think in the end, he was right about that too. Amanda smiled a smile that finally reached her eyes, reminding me of the little girl she'd been before Ricardo came into our lives. "He'd be proud of you, Mom, of everything you built from the pain. Of both of us," I gently corrected. "He always knew you'd find your way back." We stared at the starry sky in silence for a few minutes, each lost in her own thoughts. The foundation had become more than just a job for us. It was a shared mission, a purpose that reconnected us in a way I never imagined possible after everything we'd been through. "What happened in court today?" Amanda finally said. "When did the judge recognize her?" It was like watching fate unfold, as if all the pieces were finally falling into place. "That's life," I replied. "Sometimes the kindnesses we offer come back when we need them most." I never imagined that shy young intern would one day become the judge who sentenced Ricardo. You were always like that, weren't you? Always helping others without expecting anything in return. I smiled, reminding myself of all the small gestures throughout my life that I never considered extraordinary. Bringing coffee to interns who were working late defending younger employees from tyrannical bosses, offering a helping hand to colleagues in need. It's just the way I was raised, I replied. Your grandmother always said that kindness is the only investment that never fails. Amanda raised her glass. To justice and to the kindness that always returns. 5 years have passed since Ricardo's trial. The Alfredo Mendoza Foundation has become a national benchmark in defending the rights of the elderly. What began as a small legal support office has expanded to 3 units in different cities, offering not only legal assistance, but also psychological support, social activities, and most recently, temporary housing for elderly people in vulnerable situations. One sunny spring morning, I was sitting in the foundation's garden, watching a group of women participating in a Tai Chi class, when Amanda approached with an envelope in her hands. It arrived today, she said, handing me the envelope bearing the Ministry of Justice seal. I think it's what we were waiting for. With hands slightly trembling with age, now 75, I could already feel the weight of the years on my joints. I opened the envelope and read its contents. It was approved, I announced, feeling a lump in my throat. The White Law Project for the Asset and Psychological Protection of Vulnerable Elderly People was passed yesterday. Amanda sat next to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. We did it, Mom. We really did it. The bill, the result of 3 years of tireless work, alongside legislators and elder rights organizations, created stronger legal mechanisms to protect people over 65 from financial and psychological abuse, especially that perpetrated by family members. It was the culmination of everything we had learned from our own painful experience, transformed into a tool that could prevent thousands of other seniors from suffering the same ordeal. Your dad would be so proud, I murmured carefully, putting the letter back in the envelope. Not just of us, but of how his foresight allowed us to create something so much bigger than ourselves. Amanda took my wrinkled hand in hers. At 50, she had grown into a strong and compassionate woman, completely different from the manipulated and insecure person who nearly kicked me out of my own home. Her work at the foundation had transformed her just as it had transformed me. I have something to show you, she said, helping me up, a surprise we're planning for the foundation's anniversary celebration. We walked together to the new wing of the main building, which had been closed in recent weeks during renovations. Amanda opened the door and led me inside. The once empty walls were now covered with photographs, dozens of them carefully framed. They were the faces of elderly people we had helped over the years, each with a small plaque, briefly telling their story. That this is the story corridor, Amanda explained. We want everyone who visits the foundation to see the faces and hear the stories of the people we help, so they understand that each senior is not just a case, but a lifetime of experiences, memories, and dignity. In the center of the main wall, there was an empty space waiting for a larger painting. And here, she continued, we'll go your photograph, Mom, with the story that started all this. I felt my eyes fill with tears. I don't know if I deserve a place of prominence like this. After all, I was lucky. Many others don't have the protection Alfredo left me. That's exactly why his story needs to be told, Amanda insisted, to show that resistance is possible, that it's never too late to fight back, and that even the worst betrayals can eventually lead to something good. We walked slowly down the corridor, stopping to read some of the stories. Olivia, 82, who got her house back after her nephew tried to sell it without her consent. Mr. Alberto, 77, who escaped an abusive marriage after decades of psychological manipulation. Mrs. Carmen, 90, who sued her children for embezzlement and now gave lectures on financial independence for seniors. All of those people, Amanda said, found their voice and their strength because you found yours first. That evening, after a tiring but rewarding day, I returned home, the same home I had almost lost 5 years earlier. Amanda now lived in a small house of her own near the foundation, but we still had dinner together regularly, and on Sundays she came to have breakfast with me, resuming a tradition we had lost during the difficult years. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, looking out at the garden Alfredo loved so much, which was now more beautiful than ever. The orchids bloomed abundantly, tended by my hands, which, though slower with age, still knew exactly how much water and sun each plant needed. I thought about how my life had completely changed in these past few years. From the near tragedy of losing my home and dignity, a purpose emerged that I never imagined I had. From my only daughter's betrayal came a deeper and truer reconciliation than our previous relationship had ever been. On the table next to my chair was the old jewelry box Amanda had tried to steal, now returned and restored. I opened it and took out my mother's pearl jewelry box, running my fingers over the smooth, shining beads. Tomorrow, I would wear it to the founding anniversary ceremony, where the White House bill would be officially announced. A small envelope at the bottom of the box caught my eye. I opened it and found a handwritten note from Amanda. "Mom, I'll never be able to completely erase the pain I caused, but I hope to remain worthy of the second chance you gave me. Every day at the foundation reminds me that our work isn't just about laws and rights, but about restoring the dignity that many try to take away from our seniors. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to do the right thing. With all my love and gratitude, Amanda." I put the note back in the box, feeling a peace that only comes when we finally understand that even the most painful experiences can take us to places we never imagined reaching. The next morning, as I was getting ready for the ceremony, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the white hair I now wore with pride, the wrinkles that marked a face that had known both suffering and joy, the eyes that had cried so many tears, but now shone with purpose and satisfaction. And I thought about what I would say in my speech, the words I would like other women my age to hear and take away with them. It's never too late to fight back. It's never too late to transform pain into purpose. And it's never, ever too late to discover your own strength, even when those meant to protect you are the very ones trying to tear you down. When I arrived at the foundation that morning, I was greeted by a crowd of smiling faces. The team we had built, the seniors we had helped, authorities and supporters who believed in our cause. And at the center of it all, Amanda, now the foundation's executive director, was waiting for me with a warm and sincere hug. As I stepped onto the stage to give my speech, I looked at all those people and felt a profound gratitude for everything. Yes, everything. Even Ricardo and Amanda's attempts to take everything away from me. Because without that darkness, I would never have discovered the light that now illuminated so many other lives. My name is Blanca. I began adjusting the microphone. I'm 75 years old, and this is the story of how I almost lost everything, only to find a purpose greater than I ever imagined. And as I shared my journey, I saw in the audience's eyes the recognition, the hope, and most importantly, the determination that my story would not be unique, that together we were creating a world where older adults would be treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. At the end of the speech, as applause echoed around the hall, I looked up at the sky through the high windows and smiled. Did you see that, Alfredo? I thought. You were right, mostly. Now, if you liked this story, click on this next video that's appearing on the screen right now, because it tells a story of betrayal and twist like you've never seen before.